Okay, today I'm going to talk about what is the age of the Earth and why it is important. And the big basic question is whether it's thousands or billions of years old. And we'll talk about the importance right here. One reason it's important is there was a 2009 American research group that sampled 1,000 individuals from coast to coast and balanced according to population and gender, with just under half being 20 to 25 to 29 and 20 to 24 the rest of them. And what they found in the research is if you don't believe in the Bible accounts, when did you first have doubts? And here you can see the different percentage, and 83% said during middle and high school they started to have doubts in the biblical accounts. Which of these make you question the Bible the most? And all of them are rather minor, but the number one was the Earth is not 10,000 years old, or less than 10,000 years old. They think it's billions of years old because they've been told that. And so it is a big problem, and some people will say that, well, it's those people that teach that the Earth is young. We just teach them that the Bible says the Earth is old, they wouldn't lose their faith. There's this video that was done by Creation Ministries International, and it's called Fallout. Students explained why they left or remained in church. So they only interviewed in colleges people that identified as Christians growing up in a church, and asked them whether they're still going to church or not, and showed that all the ones that were taught evidence against old age and evidence against evolution stayed in the church, and those who were taught that the Earth was billions of years old, they left the faith. So the problem is that they aren't taught the evidence against evolution and the age of the Earth. And here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:23, we preach Christ crucified to the Jews a stumbling block, and to Greeks foolishness. And so the Greeks have a different worldview than the Jews. The Jews believe in the God of the Bible, and they believe that the Old Testament is true. And so when you present Jesus Christ to them, you can present Jesus Christ to them, and then it's a stumbling block. But with the Greeks, it's totally foolishness to start with Jesus Christ. And Paul and Mars Hill, Acts 17, starts with their God, that unknown God. And you got to go and start where the Holy Spirit's working in them. And actually, Billy Graham, he started his ministries in the 1940s, and he had a ton of people that he brought to salvation. And they asked in interviews after they come forward, they have the counselors talk to them. They ask them, is this a first-time commitment or a second-time commitment? And during the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, it was almost all first-time commitments. Then in the 60s, after they started teaching evolution in our schools, it was second-time commitments. And 70s became almost exclusively second-time commitments. So you have to start with a different point. You can't start with the gospel, with the people with the Greek worldview. And Proverbs says this interesting point, 26:4 and 5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you will also be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. And so basically it's saying, don't say things that they think are crazy, but just show that his ideas, his worldview is craziness, and so that he won't think he's wise. So that's what you got to do. You got to start with, in witnessing, you got to start with showing that their ideas are wrong and slowly bring them to biblical ideas. And your goal is ultimately to bring them to the cross. How do we do it? Jesus said, "Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." So you don't want to be overpowering, but you want to be smart about it and do it in a smart way, is what he's saying. So we're going to start off. First of all, there's two different types of science, and they really don't teach that in the schools. There's operation science, that's observable science that you can repeat and observe and do. There's historical science, and this is trying to reconstruct a past event from the available evidence. Public textbooks are using the same word for science, for observational and historical science. They arbitrarily define science as naturalism and outlaw the supernatural. They present molecules to man evolution as a fact. They are imposing the religion of naturalism, atheism on generations of students. And that's the big problem. They don't know the difference between observational and historical science. They're teaching a religion of naturalism, materialism, humanism. So you gotta learn how to think logically. And there's 3 tests for any belief system, 3 tests for the truth. First is logical consistency. Are the claims being made consistent with each other, or are there clear contradictions? Second is empirical adequacy. Is there evidence to back up the assertions being made by the belief system? So logically consistent, and is there evidence to back them up? And experiential relevance. Do the claims stack up with reality, and are they meaningful for my life? Do they match up with what you've lived in your life and what you observe in your life? And Christ that wants us to have a child's heart but a grown-up's head. That's what C.S. Lewis said. So we've got to understand evidence a little bit here. I want to talk about the importance of direct evidence versus circumstantial evidence. And direct evidence is someone observing, which can be saw what happened, or it can be a camera. But sometimes the credibility of the witness is not so good, and maybe sometimes the suspect will claim someone else is doing it and claim to be a witness, and direct evidence has a lot of problems. And the Bible does claim to be the Word of God, the direct evidence of God, but we have problems with that because, first of all, is it credible? Has it been preserved over the years? And circumstantial evidence is evidence that's been left behind after the crime, and you have to connect the crime evidence to the crime, to the event that happened in the past. So you can do this right here with a fingerprint of the suspect and the blood of the victim, and you see that the knife matches the cuts on the victim, and so you have a good case with circumstantial evidence. But the best evidence is when you have a credible eyewitness who sees that the suspect did this to the victim, and then the circumstantial evidence backs that up. And so that's what we try to do with creation science. We try to back up the direct evidence of the Bible. And this is a quote to show the credibility of the Bible. The Bible is the most accurate of all ancient writings. There are 25,000 archaeological findings that back it up. There are nearly 25,000 manuscripts and portions of manuscripts that attest to its accuracy. There are many extra biblical writings that back up the claims about Christ. It has withstood all attempts to destroy it. It is the #1 bestseller. All of its prophecies, except those pertaining to the end times and the second coming have been accurately fulfilled. Rejection of the Bible is not done on an intellectual basis. So it is credible. But is it credible about the age of the earth is what we're going to do. And it does say how old the earth was. And Archbishop James Ussher, he 1625 to 1656, he did a lot of research, and he came up with a date of 4004 BC, October 23 at 9 o'clock a.m. So that's basically what the Bible says, and I don't have a problem with Ussher's estimate. And so that's what the Bible says. That's the witness of the Bible. So the Septuagint shows it to be 1700 years later, because they have different dates on some of the genealogy, but it is less than 10,000 years old. The ages issue, evolution requires long periods of times. Ancient Earth age is based on an interpretation of the fossil record. When the interpretation from the biblical worldview, the fossil record is clearly the result of a global flood. That's what we're going to look at a little bit today. All pagan myths had long ages. Some of them had millions of years, some had billions of years, some had infinite amount of time. They all need the same huge amount of time and for their life beginning in the sea, coming up on land, and the same story that goes back all the way to the beginning of time. Here's a little comic. This is talking to the evil spirit. Tell me, dark spirit, how do I deceive the masses? Easy, just get them to believe in millions and millions of years. And that's very true. So the big thing with a fossil record is uniformitarianism versus catastrophism. James Hutton started the idea of uniformitarianism in 1788 in his book Theory of the Earth. Charles Lyell in 1830s. He's a lawyer in the principles of geology. Gradual processes, geologic processes is what happens. Erosion, deposition, mountain building. Earth must be billions of years old. Most everyone else believes in catastrophism. All geologic change occurs suddenly during catastrophes. Earth is only a few thousand years old. It can only be found in the textbooks because it doesn't exist in real life. A Scottish lawyer named Charles Lyell made up the geologic column in the book Principles of Geology, published in 1830. He hated the Bible, so in a desperate attempt to disprove the flood, he made up the layers and ages and assigned fossils to them. There is no geologic column. Even Carl Sagan agrees it doesn't exist, and he is an evolutionist. So we'll see that later. It just doesn't exist. Carl Sagan agrees. Is the Bible fact or fiction? That's the big issue, and Time magazine points it out. The age issue, atheism dominates academia and public schools. Some Christians have adopted naturalism and scientific age of the earth. Effects is to degrade the reliability of Scripture, which can lead to a loss of faith or impede others from coming to the faith. So that's the two things: to validate the truth of the Scriptures to believers, and to get the obstacles, the lies out of the way of unbelievers coming to faith. And this is what happens when you accept the long ages. It's biblical worldview is worldview number one, combined with biblical, a non-biblical pagan worldview with a biblical worldview, and the result is a new belief, the result of combining one and two. And this is in the Bible, biblical syncretism, and this is what is warned against in the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament. And Romans 12:2 tells us, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve that God's will is good, pleasing, and perfect will. One compromise is theistic evolution. This book by John Otis calls it a sinful compromise, and that's what I believe it is. And the problem with this is a lot of Christians become theistic evolutionists, and I don't think they lose their faith, but if you check their children, all seem to lose their faith, and if they weren't taught anything different. And so it's a big problem, and that's why we have such a skyrocketing number of nuns in the United States today and around the world. Here it says God made this millions of years ago. It is now extinct, but evolved into something better, now extinct into something better, now extinct into something better, now extinct into something better. And then he says, why would I want to believe in a God that has to do so much erasing before he could bring me into the picture? And that's the problem with theistic evolution. So you're a Christian who believes in evolution, eh? If evolution is true, the creation story is a myth. If it's a myth, Adam and Eve never existed. If Eve didn't exist, she never ate the forbidden fruit, which caused original sin. No original sin, no reason for Jesus to be sent to die on the cross. No Jesus, no Christianity. But science and faith are still compatible, right? No, they aren't. Another compromise is called the gap theory. And the gap theory starts in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth in chapter 1, verse 1, and then they say there's a big gap between 1 and 2. The earth was without form and void. And actually in the Hebrew sentence, it's all one sentence. There's no gap there. All they did with the gap theory is try to compromise with the fossil record. Millions or billions of years, and they accept the geologic ages of the fossil record, but they do include Lucifer's flood. They think that Lucifer was on Earth, and he messed up, and that's what all the dead animals and stuff in the fossil record came from Lucifer's flood. And the good news about this is that they do believe in recreation. They believe in a little Adam and Eve and the fall, and they don't really believe in a literal flood. But it's not so bad as theistic evolution, but it's still a compromise, a simple compromise. The problem today is the further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it, which is very true. And now you can see that young earth creationists are probably the most persecuted Christians in America. Fortunately, we aren't persecuted very bad, but they're the most hated, and the thing of it is, evolutionists love theistic evolutionists, and they ask sometimes when I interact with them, why don't you become a theistic evolutionist? And I said, well, if the evidence pointed to that, I would, but you believe in evolution already, why don't you become one? And they laugh at me hysterically, like I'm crazy. And so, it's a big problem. But it's also a problem with Christians, and you can see right here the whole thinking of this. This is in a book from William Dembski, The End of Christianity, and he's professor at Southern Evangelical Seminary, and he says, the young earth solution to reconciling the order of creation with natural history makes good exegetical and theological sense. Indeed, the overwhelming consensus of theologians up through the Reformation held to this view. I myself would adopt it in a heartbeat, except that nature seems to present such strong evidence against it. I am hardly alone in my reluctance to accept young earth creationism. In our current mental environment, Informed as it is by modern astrophysics and geology, the scientific community as a whole regards young Earth creation as scientifically untenable. They think it's unscientific. Don't worry about being persecuted. Jesus said, "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." Jesus is the truth, and he wants his followers to be preaching the truth to the world. So we want to look at the 5 pillars of long ages. First, there was no global flood. Second, the geologic column was laid down over long ages. Radiometric dating is the third one. Fourth is dinosaurs. And fifth is the Grand Canyon. So we see that there's several pillars here, and we're going to look at basically the first 4, maybe the Grand Canyon later. The first blow to long ages in the modern era was the Genesis Flood book that came out in 1960, written by John Whitcomb and Henry Morris. The Genesis Flood was a bombshell in the current conservative evangelical community in 1960. It took a chemist turned Old Testament professor, Whitcomb, and a hydrodynamic trained civil engineer, Morris, over 10 years to formulate the case to return to a literal historical interpretation of Genesis 1 through 11. They did a great job. They're great heroes in the Christian faith. Sadly, because most of the evangelical community had for 160 years uncritically accepted the claim of historic science concerning the age of the earth and had readjusted their interpretation of Genesis 1 through 11. No evangelical dispensational published would touch the manuscript. Whitcomb and Morris insisted that the strategy of consistently accommodating the Genesis text to whatever happened to be the latest pontification of historical science had done nothing to defend the Bible. They did nothing by compromising with the lies of the Luciferian conspiracy. Evidence for a worldwide flood. I have a video on it, but there's plenty of evidence. Just an example here. Fossils of fish swallowing fish, buried and fossilized, must have been quite rapid to have preserved a fish in the act of swallowing another fish. Thousands of such fossils have been found. So this is a big problem. Fossils all over the world show evidence of rapid burial. Many fossils, such as fossilized jellyfish, show by the details of their soft, fleshy portions that they were buried rapidly before they could decay. Normally, dead animals and plants quickly decompose. The presence of fossilized remains of many other animals buried in mass graves and lying in twisted and contorted positions suggests violent and rapid burial over large areas. These observations, together with the occurrence of compressed fossils and fossils that cut across 2 or more layers of sedimentary rock, are strong evidence that these sediments encasing these fossils were deposed rapidly, not over hundreds of millions of years. Furthermore, almost all these sediments that formed today's rock are sorted by water. The worldwide fossil record is therefore evidence of rapid death and burial of animal and plant life by a worldwide catastrophic flood. The fossil record is not evidence of slow change. So the evidence is there. Fossilized polystrate trees shows that they were buried rapidly and there wasn't a long period of time between the layering. That it all happened rapidly. That's very good evidence. 85% of the Earth's surface does not even have 3 geologic periods in the correct consecutive order. It's evidence of a young Earth. And the only place you find a good geologic column is in textbooks. It just isn't out there in the real world. It's not experiential evidence. Worldwide Tapeats sandstone, and this is supposedly been laid down by a river, and the evidence just isn't there. Dr. Tim Clary from ICR, he's found that these different layers all were flowing from the same direction. They weren't laid down, and it wasn't by a river, and it wasn't by wind and rain. It was rapidly and by huge sediment-filled tsunamis. You have bent strata, which is a big problem. They tell you that, well, it got bent, it got buried into the center of the earth and got all heated up, and that's the way the rocks can bend. And the problem with that is that the sedimentary rock would turn into metamorphic rock, and there wouldn't be any fossils in it. Well, the sedimentary rock is still there with fossils in it, meaning that it was bent while it was still soft with movement in the earth that was going on during the flood or right after. The radioisotopes in the age of the earth is another pillar, and there was a group that was put together by ICR. This is the rate group here, and that started the program for ICR, and basically showing that the radiometric dating was wrong. Radioisotopes in the age of the earth was the first $1 million research project designed by scientists who worked within the creation community that had resulted from Whitcomb and Morse's earlier pioneering work. Whereas the Genesis flood had focused on reinterpreting the observed geological strata, this project focused on the methodology used to assign dates to the geological evidence. Taking some years to complete this research, the project revealed many assumptions of the radioisotope methods were unjustified and produced varying dates of specific geologic samples. So they basically disproved the long ages and did a great job in putting together. These are all platinum PhD scientists from public universities, and just, if you check it out, they did a wonderful job. So fossils are carbon dated and showed up to be thousands of years old, and they found them in dinosaurs. So dinosaurs aren't evidence of long age. And carbon-14 dating is a friend to creationism. For diamonds and coals also show to be thousands of years old and not millions or billions of years old. Just the evidence, they disproved the long age based on the dating methods that they had. How do you debunk carbon dating? Answer: find doorknobs embedded in 300 million year old coal formation. That's what the rate team did. They measured coal in a coal field from the top to the bottom. They all came back with the same ages. 500, 300 million years old artifact. Carboniferous period. We know an amphibian or lizard must have made it, and since there were only animals alive at the time, looks like a human made it from these millions and millions of years ago. Here's the one that came out in 1851, 4.5-inch high zinc and silver vessel found in solid rock, 600 million year old rock in Rochester, Massachusetts in 1851. Evolution, not for everyone, because when all you can prove is the exception to the rule, it's time to switch your game, you can win. Here's all these creatures were tested and showed to be all these millions and millions of years old. Here's a problem that Darwin pointed out. He said no organism wholly soft can be preserved in the fossil record. Darwin never expected science to discover any soft-bodied organism as fossils because he imagined slow and gradual process for all fossil formations. However, such soft animals have been found as fossils. Fossils have been found to be able to form rapidly under sudden, rapid, catastrophic conditions. This is another blow to the foundation of naturalistic process of eons of time. It's a big problem. The Reed team found all kinds of soft tissues going all the way back to 1977 and published them in 1911. Here's you can see a little bit better of the ages, and just from millions of years ago, worms and shrimp and fish eyes and all these things from supposedly millions of years ago. Soft tissue is everywhere. Darwin was right. Soft tissue is a huge problem for us now. This is dinosaur soft tissue vessels and cellular preservations. And this was Dr. Mary Schweitzer found this, I think, in 2012. And she just was out, found a big T-Rex bone, I believe, and had to break it in half to put it in the helicopter, got back to the lab and found all this soft tissue and stuff. So she just published it, thought it was interesting. Why is all this soft tissue inside? And of course the creationists loved it, and the woke evolutionists hated it, and they tried to destroy her, tried to get her fired from her job. And she just said, hey, I just published what I found, you know, what did I do wrong? And anyway, anybody who wants to publish it in the future learn a good lesson, but she had to come up with an idea that it was from long ago, and it somehow gotten bedded in iron or something, so it's a big problem. Scientists claim they found a perfectly preserved dinosaur fossil killed when the mass extinction asteroid hit 66 million years ago. Incredibly well-preserved dinosaur fossils were uncovered at Tanis, a site in North Dakota. So they're finding all these skins and everything, and this was just a recent discovery. The age of the lava when it hardens is igneous rock, and the age of it is determined by the amount of mother and daughter, or the parent and daughter elements. They assume that the parent element would turn into the daughter element, which is be like uranium turning into lead. So they look at the amount of uranium in there and how much lead, and they can supposedly figure out how old it is. But let me use an example. And if you had a faucet that was dripping and you measured how fast it was dripping into a bucket, and you found out that it was dripping about 50 ounces per hour, and there was 300 ounces in the bucket, you would conclude that it had been dripping in there for 6 hours. It's pretty simple math. But what if you had a water meter that said that it's only been on for an hour? So how would you try to explain the difference then? You'd say, well, there must have been 250 in before it started dripping, or else it was dripping faster. And so that's the problems with radiometric dating. They assume that the amount of one is 0 and the other is 100, and they didn't lose any during the time, or extra was added, and it was always at the constant rate. Well, it's a big problem, and we look at it a different way, and when they measure known rocks, they come different. And I say that was probably never calibrated. It's just bad science, basically. Here's some other known aged lava filled, and it shows they're all millions of years old when they're less than 2,000 years old. Most of them less than 100 years old. Also, did you know 10 human skeletons, women and children, was found in the same layer as dinosaurs? Malachi Man. There are finding humans with dinosaurs, but now they just write them off. They still were back then. Now they just say, well, it's got mixed in here by mistake, and don't do anything about it. But before, they were finding a lot of humans with dinosaurs, and they just ignore it because they know they can't be. So that's a big problem. This is not a human footprint. Why? Because it's found lower than strata than Lucy. Here's another human footprint that was stepped on by a dinosaur. And it's clearly a human footprint, and it shows that dinosaurs and humans were there at the same time. A 1,400 million year old hammer, iron hammer with fossilized wood handle, found by Max Hahn near London, Texas, 1934, in lower Cretaceous rock formation supposedly over 150 million years ago. The 6-inch long metal hammerhead is unusual mixture of 96% iron, 2.6% chlorine, 0.74% sulfur, and no carbon. It also has a unique outer layer of iron oxide protecting the hammer from rust. Unless dinosaurs were skilled tool makers, then this hammer was made by a human. This artifact is only a mystery if evolution is true. But if the Bible is true, there is no mystery at all. For God judged man's wickedness with a global flood about 4,500 years ago, burying the hammer and its owner and the rest of that world in hundreds of feet of mud. It later hardened into rock, preserving the countless fossilized creatures we dig up today. People reject such evidence because it reminds them that there is a God and He judged the world before and He will judge it again. That's a problem. And just the whole makeup of the iron there just couldn't have been done hundreds of years ago. It was done in a different environment with different kind of pressures, and that's the only way it was, and shows that there was a different atmospheric condition before the flood. 300 Cambrian explosions, fully formed body parts, not a single transitional form from a single cell organism is found. So you get the amoebas or whatever single cell creatures in the Precambrian layer, and suddenly they evolved into there, and including the trilobite, who has some of the most sophisticated eyes in the world. This all came together in a 5 million year period. Just, it's an evidence that this wasn't long ages. Dwayne Gish says, now evolution is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links not seen. Another evidence is not long ages. The moon is receding about 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches per year. Satellite lasers ranging performed at the Goddard Geophysical and Astronomical Observatory showed that it's moving away. And so it's going to be a problem. And 1,000 years is no problem. You get to 1 million years ago, the Earth's going to be flooded because of the tides that are going around the Earth. And about 10 million years, it probably would start breaking up. And 1.4 billion years ago, it would have been in contact. It would have broke up long before that. But we can see the Earth is not 4.5 billion years old. Great Barrier Reef is estimated at being less than 4,200 years old. The Earth is billions of years old. Why is there not older coral reefs? This is supposed to be the oldest coral reef in the world, and it shows to be thousands of years old, not billions of years old. Land erosion is a big problem. Rain and wind are both slowly eroding away the continents and the mountains here on Earth, and the rate at which this occurs has been accurately measured by geologists. Erosion is about 2.4 inches per year per 1,000 years for the continent as a whole. Mainstream science says the continents have been exposed to weather for the past 3.5 billion years, assuring that the erosion rates were similar in the past, and the continent of North America would have eroded flat to sea level in a mere 10,000 years. If North America had been exposed for 3.5 billion years, it would have been eroded flat 350 times. Helium in the atmosphere. Diffusion models indicate the helium is produced from the Earth's crust at a rate much faster than the amount escaping to the outer space. If the Earth is billions of years old, the radioactive production of helium in the Earth's crust should have added a large quantity of helium to the atmosphere. The low concentration of measured helium in the atmosphere suggests that the Earth's atmosphere is quite young. Maybe the Bible is right. That's another evidence that it's not billions of years old. Showing the inaccuracy of the dating methods, the Lost Squadron warplanes, which crashed in 1942, were found in 1988 under millions of years worth of ice. They were under 259 feet of ice. When they went back, they thought they would still be at the surface. And no, the ice forms much rapider than they thought. Another error in the dating methods. This is my favorite. The Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker. A million years ago, the magnetic field would have been so strong to rip iron from your blood. So it's not millions of years. We know that the Earth's magnetic field has decayed about 5% per century since measurements began in 1840. At the current rate, the field and thus the Earth would have been no older than 20,000 years. Perhaps a Bible-based model of a 6,000-year-old Earth with a magnetic field that experienced extremely upheaval during a worldwide flood better explains not only the Earth's magnetic field, but also the others in our solar system. So, that's a big problem, but the mechanism for generating the geologic field remains one of the great central unsolved problems of geoscience. What causes it? Magnetic fields comes from flowing electricity, and they say it's from liquid iron that's magnetized, but we know that iron loses magnetism when it gets liquefied and gets that hot. So it's a big problem. Another point is magnetism is almost much of a puzzle now as it was when William Gilbert wrote his classic text concerning magnetism, magnetic bodies, and the great magnet Earth in 1600. So it's a big problem. What's causing it? I'll tell you what's causing it. If you read go and watch my video on the heavens declare, the magnetic field is from a Birkeland current, and this is recent discoveries that run from the sun into the Earth, into all the planets that have magnetic fields in the solar system. So these Birkeland currents are what do that, but also the sun is fed by a big Birkeland current from the center of the universe, they say. So the sun is getting less of a current, and it's sending out less of a current, and we would expect the corona of the sun to be shrinking, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There is also archaeological evidence that shows the Earth's magnetic field was 40% stronger in AD 1000 that matches the decay that we observed since 1830. How does this show the Earth is young? By knowing how fast the magnetic field is decaying, you can calculate how strong it would be in our history, and it turns out that if you go back far enough, it causes serious problems. It was calculated that at the current could not have been decaying more than 10,000 years. Otherwise, starting strength would have been sufficient to melt the Earth. Thus, the Earth must be less than 10,000 years old. Andrew Snelling. The Earth's magnetic field has been decaying so fast that it couldn't be more than 10,000 years old. Dr. John. You see how it would have been a problem more than 8,000 years ago. And here's what we think happened, that it was blocked during the flood time by something coming from the sun, and got back up before the time of Christ, and it's been steadily decaying, and it actually would have been decaying at the same rate we got back up to when it got back reestablished. All the planets in the solar systems have decaying magnetic fields, and this is evidence of the sun's having less field of a Birkeland current going through it. The whole corona is shrinking. It's not the sun that is shrinking, it's the corona. The corona is based on plasma that's in the universe that is being caused to go to the glow and arc mode when it reached the magnetic field of the sun. So based on the observed rate of the shrinking sun, 100,000 years ago, life of any form could not have existed as is on the Earth. The sun would have engulfed the Earth only 20 million years ago, but the Earth is 228 times older than that, right? That is great evidence too, that shrinking sun that people don't like to talk about, but it's been proven by several ancient studies over hundreds of years that the sun is shrinking. Is our universe eternal? If this burned out, why wouldn't you expect that to burn out? And if you got a car driving down the freeway and I said it's been driving forever, you say no, it's got a limited amount of energy. So the sun's still burning. Therefore, the universe is not eternal. If the universe was infinitely old, the stars would have burned out long ago. Therefore, the universe had a beginning in the finite past. Anything that begins to exist has a cause. Anything that has power to cause the universe to come in existence deserves to be called God. The Age of the Earth, and this is by John Eddy, an astrophysicist. He says solar expert John Eddy has stated, I suspect that the sun is 4.5 billion years old. However, given some new and unexpected results to the contrary, and some time for the frantic recalculation and theoretical readjustment, I suspect that we could live with Bishop Ussher's value for the age of the Earth and the sun. I don't think we have much in the way of observable evidence in the astronomy to contradict that. So he's saying the evidence is for a young Earth in the universe. Brian Thomas said, if our universe were billions of years old, we see countless millions of supernova remnants from all the stars that died over the ends, but we don't. We have to see about the right number for about 6,000 years. Sodium level in the oceans. This is one of the oldest methods around to get an idea of the age of the Earth, or oceans in this case. This method was first suggested by Isaac Newton as a way to find the age of the Earth. We know how much goes in per year and the output per year. We note the amount that's in there, and the amount isn't consistent with thousands and not millions of years. So the strongest arguments for a young Earth is the amount of salt found in the oceans. If the world were billions of years old, as evolutionists and progressive creationists insist, there should be so much salt in the ocean that virtually nothing could survive in the enormous amount of salinity. So it's a big problem, the amount of salt in there. Sediment levels that's on the bottom of the ocean give us another indication of its age. Every year, water and wind erode about 20 billion tons of sediment from the continents and deposit them in the side of the ocean. These sediments accumulate on the ocean floor, and the average total thickness for the sediment is 400 meters deep. So it's 400 meters. That's consistent not with millions of years, but of thousands of years. Volcanic measurements. If the Earth is billions of years old, you would expect there to be billions of years worth of volcanic debris spread around the Earth. We can measure how fast volcanic material is ejecting today, measured how much has been ejected, and it doesn't line up with billions of years. A subsequent calculation based on a conservative estimate of an average average of 1 cubic kilometer of volcanic material per year being ejected by the Earth's volcanoes suggests that in 3.5 billion years the entire Earth should have been covered by a thick blanket of volcanic material with a height of about 23,000 feet. Just isn't there. Nuclear physicist declares science will never contradict the Bible. An accomplished nuclear physicist has recently expressed outspoken support for the Genesis creation account, arguing that the evolutionary worldview fails dismally in its description of scientific reality. Here's this quote: "The final arbiter of any theory must be based on the strength of its description of the physical reality," he said. "It is in this respect that the theory of evolution fails dismally. The long ages fail dismally." Adrian Rogers says, "It is better to be divided by the truth than to be united in error. It is better to speak the truth that hurts and then heals than falsehood that comforts and then kills. It is better to be hated for telling the truth than to be loved for telling a lie." And so I don't know what all he's talking about there. Anytime you compromise with the Bible, it's going to be an error. Don't try to unify with compromise. Don't try to unify with long ages in the church. It's a big problem, and you aren't going to have unity. And Christ prayed for us to have unity, and Paul talks a lot about unity, and unity's only come when we unite in the truth. So the basic question is the Bible truth. The circumstantial evidence is there. We have the Word of God. He's the direct evidence. He's credible. And the circumstantial evidence is that the Bible is right. The earth is not billions of years old or even millions of years old, but thousands of years old. The evidence is there. So if you have any questions, comments, and concerns, leave them below. And this has got to be this is my fact checker, and this needs to be your fact checker too.